Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our digital seminar, In the Mind of an Investor. It is organized by the Life Science Cluster and our Investor Working Group. It's including Sarsia Seed, Øyvind Enger, and also Susanne Stuffers from P53. They are both speaking today, and we are happy to present a strong list of speakers, and I hope that you will enjoy the seminar. My name is Hanne Mette Christensen. I'm heading the Life Science Cluster. We're an industry cluster with more than 80 members within health, marine, agricultural, and industrial biotech sectors. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our digital seminar, In the Mind of an Investor. It is organized by the Life. If you have any questions, please send them in the chat. We have 3 goals: useful insight for companies, new connections between investors, and also good partnering between companies and investors in a time with no physical meeting places. We have about 100 people registered for the conference today. Thank you for registering, for being here, and welcome everyone. The meeting will be recorded. We actually have 21 investors today, 34 companies, 19 tech transfer offices, clusters or incubators, 7 advisors, and also 10 university or academic projects. We have about 85 people signed up in BRELLA right now, 80 requests and 40 plus meetings. So first of all, I will show you a few slides about our cluster. Next, please. The sponsor for the conference is Bayer, so we would direct a warm thank you to Bayer for co-sponsoring the partnering platform. Next, please. The vision of the Life Science Cluster is to create more jobs, more value creation, and more export out of Norway. We will do this through more collaboration between companies and academia, and also across industry sectors. And we have a goal which seems maybe a bit bold, on 5,000 new jobs before 2023. We have this goal to really signal how large the potential in these industries are. Next slide, please. We have strategic working groups, as I mentioned for you to the far right corner. We have an investor working group which has collaborated with us on setting up this seminar. We also have working groups on Startup Help Desk, cooperation and sharing, communication and competence and education. Next, please. Our team consists of myself, Iselin Wood, who is member and event coordinator, and also Christine Fløysand on communications. Next. The life sciences offer solutions for all the great challenges of mankind. With this, we mean that within all these sectors, health, marine, agriculture, industrial biotech, we are developing solutions to help with feed or food, with vaccines, that is across all sectors, medicines or diagnostics, and also a lot of these industries not only answer to the sustainability goals, but actually creates new solutions. And I think this is also something that makes it especially interesting to look at this area for investments in the future. And this is also something we see that more and more investors are interested in this area. Next. We have more than 80 members. It spans from large to small companies to supplier industries, universities and governmental organizations, and also investors, as many of you here today. Next, please. So this one is the main foil that I would actually like to show you today. And there's a disclaimer to this one that it's not mathematically deduced. So the placement of the companies relative to each other is not accurate. It is meant to show that we have a very interesting pipeline of new projects. In the far left bottom corner, we have the early stage companies. And on the right upper corner, we have the more mature companies. As you see, we have Aker BioMarine and Pharmac in the far right corner. They are not exactly investable companies, but both of them stem from Norwegian science and Norwegian research. Pharmac has a giant factory for fish vaccines for the world market at Kløfta, just north of Oslo. They were bought by Zoetis and they are now supplying the world market with vaccines for fish. Aker BioMarine is harvesting krill and making omega-3, and they're also now setting up a factory in Norway for producing protein from the rest of the raw materials that they get. And you can also see that there's, if you put a straight line through the upper line of companies, many of these are health-related companies with higher capital needs. If you put a line on the lower end, you hit many of the supplier industry companies. Curida, for instance, is a company where Investinor is invested, and many of these companies that supply the biotechs or the pharmaceutical companies or the marine or agricultural primary companies are actually also investment objects in themselves. So this constitutes a very interesting landscape of opportunities for investors. And I think also the investors that are here today, some of them are invested in some of the companies and could potentially also be interested in talking to investors in other companies. And of course, meeting the companies themselves. Next, please. And next, please. So this and the previous slide also shows the split between the different areas. So you can see on the left side that we have a quite nice split between health, marine, agricultural, and industrial life sciences. The percentages don't match because some companies, like for instance our sponsor Bayer, are both in health, agriculture, and industrial sectors. And also on the left, on the right side, you can see the blue segments. They are large and small companies. The yellow-brown sector is the supplier industry, where there's actually also a number of interesting investment objects. Next, please. And as many of you know, there's a lot of positive activity around the country. And this is exemplified by the new life science building from the University of Oslo, which is just raising in between the National Hospital, the university, and the Science Park. Next, please. Also, we are creating export industry. The Norwegian export in total in 2018 was 999 billion NOK. About 46% of this was mainland economy. Of this, the fisheries were around 100 million, health industries around 23 million, and also actually agricultural export around 11 million. And the industries that we are supporting in all these areas are also industries that are prone to be export industries and contribute to the national GDP and export income. Next, please. So I just want to show you a few examples of each of the sectors. So on the health sector, you can see on the left, this is GE Healthcare's ultrasound imaging fluids. Some might say that this is an old invention. Still, it's actually in 2019, it had 9 billion NOK in export income. This is actually 2% alone of the GDP, or this, sorry, of the national export income. The one in the middle is Xofigo Bayer. And also you can see that drugs and diagnostics, which are our areas, are actually 85% of the health industry export. Next, please. Also, on the marine side, we have both fish, krill, colonies, kelp, algae, and different areas. The life science industry here encompasses both vaccines, feed development, ingredients, supplements, and also actually drugs for fish or the marine sector and the other areas. Next, please. Also on the agricultural side, Foods of Norway at NMBU are looking at different food sources for fish and farm animals using sustainable new ingredients. So exemplified by using wood remains enzymatically treated, and they can be actually used as food for these animals. And they have also seen that the animals that receive this kind of food can use even less antibiotics than they use already. So there's something about the food that we don't know yet, and that is a source of new inventions also. Next, please. So here I've listed a few of the national success cases in different areas. Algeta Bayer, as mentioned, Narcomed G Healthcare, as mentioned, the Dynabeads, as you might know, that's actually a major constituent of the diagnostic tool of Thermo Fisher for COVID-19 right now. So this is also actually a Norwegian invention in an international product. Several diagnostics projects, the Pharmac, Zoetis, as mentioned, and also Aker BioMarine, and also Borregaard as a very interesting company in the circular economy and using the ingredients. And one exciting element of this is that all of these have established production in Norway for the world market. So they really support and are an important constituent of our export industry. And in Norway, important to remember, highly educated labor is competitive. Next, please. So we are back to the investor or the landscape map. So this is a map of the companies. We have quite interesting portfolio of companies in the cluster. And also in this conference, you will meet a few more. One thing that we are looking into now is actually, if you look at each of these logos as a playing card, we are turning the playing card and looking at the investor list. And of course, we see that a few investors are invested in more than one company. We see that some investors collaborate more often than others. And we see that some investors maybe should have collaborated even more if they are working in some of the same fields, working with different investment risk profiles, etc. And we really need a set of investors to support companies like this going forward. We need investors in the seed stage. We need investors in the venture capital stage and also in the more mature stage, and also those that are interested in investing in companies on the market. So this is a total kind of a value chain that needs support all the way up to become successful export industries. So by this, I think I will say thank you for my part of the presentation. You can go forward to the next person, Iselin. And by this, I will welcome our first speaker, which is Susanne Stuffers, CEO and partner of P53 Invest. You were also formerly at Arctic Securities. So welcome, Susanne.
Thank you, Anne-Mette, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a little bit more about P53 and also about how we're thinking with regards to investing in healthcare, and a couple of considerations both for investors and also for companies, obviously. Next slide, please. So P53, everyone who knows a little bit about biology knows that this is a super important tumor suppressor gene. Since we started a healthcare company or investment company, we figured that a nerd name would do the best. So that's why we called it P53. We founded it in November 2018 as a joint venture between TDVeen and Ubiquity, that's my company. And TDVeen is a family office based in Stavanger. That was established by Tor Dagfinn Veen. He was a co-founder of the Skagen Funds as well. I'll get back to TDVeen, but I will first introduce P53. We're investing solely in healthcare companies, but in line with TDVeen's overall profile. We're aiming for around 8 to 10 active long-term investments to start with. And we aim to work closely with the founders of the companies to build competitive healthcare companies. We're pretty agnostic when it comes to what we invest in. I'll come back to what we're looking at, but we could invest in biotech, medtech, digital health, and so on. My background is mostly within biotech, so I always have my sweet spot there, but we're definitely looking to diversify also into the other subsectors. So a couple of themes that we're looking at when we're looking at a company. I'll get more into detail later on. But we're definitely looking mostly for companies that are founded on strong science or strong technologies. They are new and disrupting the status quo, so very innovative companies. They're groundbreaking ideas, transforming people's lives. They're increasing access for patients and give or create exceptional value for patients as well. And then, of course, the team is super important to us as we are looking to collaborate with others. So we're looking for passionate founders with a good understanding of what they're doing, not only the technology, but also the space in which they're working. And then obviously the integrity and core values from the people we work with are very important, that we're aligned along the way. So TDVeen, as I said, is a family office based in Stavanger. So TDVeen has a very strong, anchoring in creating and investing in startups. They started, for example, or established Stavanger Ventures, which is a tech venture investment company that they established together with Kjell Skappel. And it's based on a strong belief in long-term value creation. Otherwise, they're investing a lot in things that are sustainable, so a lot of ESG, social responsibility, actual value creation, creativity, and people. So across sectors, but not in, or mostly not within oil and gas. So this is a team. I didn't put in a picture of myself because you can see me, but Kjell, Silje, and Jim, they're also on the board of P53, so we're all working pretty close together. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a, well, it's more like a mind map, maybe, of how we started out, a couple of the companies that we're invested in. So yeah, it mostly says it all, but it shows that we're invested along quite a large spectrum of companies, with Gentian and Vaccibody being pretty much on the later side. Those were companies that I was very excited about when I worked as an analyst and that I really wanted to invest in as first investments. And then on the other side, we have ARX Therapeutics, for example, which is a company that well, really got going last summer. So a couple of the trends and themes that we're looking at, you can see like next wave cancer immunotherapies, other immune modulations, regenerative medicine, infectious diseases, and also other healthcare offerings. Yes, the strategic fit we've basically covered. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so then a little bit more to the generic part of investing in healthcare. Is it a complex exercise? Yes, it is, and that's because it's a huge industry, and it's not actually one industry. It's a lot of subsectors, and you may all know this already, but it really influences how you're looking at these companies and how you're doing your due diligence, because the market dynamics are very different. For all these subsectors, there are different users, different payers, different sales channels. They have large variation in sentiment and market movement, and I think that's been really shown during the COVID-19 crisis now, that some companies really soared. The ones, for example, that everyone thinks can make a vaccine or can develop a therapy, whilst others are perhaps not doing as well. So this is very important to just keep in mind. Also, regulatory guidelines are very different, and also obviously IP is vastly different between these different subsectors. Well, and I'm not going to go through all the subsectors, but because I think you know most of these, and also I may have not taken all of the subsectors in account. So if you're belonging to some of the subsectors that are not mentioned, please forgive me. And it's just as an example. So we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so when considering investment in an investment in the healthcare industry, I would say you're looking at three main levers, and I think this is pretty well, it's pretty common also in other sectors to look at these things, except from the science. Obviously, it would be something else, so it would be a technology or whatever. But otherwise, when you're looking at like landscape or competition, is always super important, and also team. Obviously, I think is one of the main things to look at when you're investing. So I listed a couple of things, but I'll come back to them in the next slide. So yeah, maybe just move on to the next one, so I won't repeat myself too much. So the science, I think, is the very most important thing to look at. It's your fundamental asset. You can't get around it. It's what you're investing in. You can maybe change some of the other things, but the science you cannot most of the time. So this is a super important and your most important consideration. I've also written down there, like, never compromise on data. That's something, if you don't understand the data, or it doesn't make sense, or the data is not good enough, I mean, most of the time it's not going to get better. So first of all, understand the mode of action. That's very important for me, that I really understand what it does, that there's a certain understanding for it as well, and that most of it is, or most of it, but that some of it at least is published, and there is a common understanding for how important this certain mechanism is. So is it a druggable target? Is it a new target? What is the potential risk, or what are the potential adverse events? What kind of molecule or what kind of antibody are you looking at? Then again, have a close look at the data. Is it reproducible? Is it peer reviewed? How many models have you used to show the data? And check the IPR situation. That's in the end what you're investing in. So if your patent isn't solid, you have done a bad investment, basically. And then also when it comes to IPR, is it possible to get new patents? For example, use patents or patents on your manufacturing, how is the patent situation abroad, so in major markets mostly, and then what are the key opinion leaders or the third parties saying about what you're actually doing. It's always good to channel check or to double check. Next slide, please. So then is a landscape, and I think that's something we have met quite some times where companies think like, oh, we're the only ones in Norway doing this, and that's great, but healthcare, it's a global affair, and you need to look across borders always. So there may be this small company in Czech Republic that does exactly the same thing, and that may be a major competitor to you as well. So know your competition, like from everywhere. It's super important to have a good overview. And then not only if you are developing a small molecule or another device, do they have the same kind of molecule or the same kind of device, but also do they have another molecule or a biologic or a gene therapy or anything else that could solve the same problem as what you want to solve. And understand the dynamics of your indication. It's very important to understand the market. It's the same as when you would otherwise launch a new iPhone or whatever. You need to understand what are the needs, what are people looking at, will they use it, is it easy enough to use, how will they favor the treatment compared to other therapies. What's the willingness to pay for this? Is there a possibility for reimbursement? How will that work out for you? And then consider the patient journey as well, and whether you're changing the value chain. So if you're changing the value chain, that's often a much higher burden for entry, right? So if you, and we have seen that with a couple of companies. So for example, Gilead, who changed the whole value chain by actually developing a cure for Hep C instead of a chronic treatment. And there was a lot to do about the pricing. So even though they had a cure, the pricing was really scrutinized because it was a lot of, well, it was a different treatment and it was a much higher upfront payment than if people would be treated with generics otherwise. And then what is super important is how crowded is your indication. So always choose something that probably as a first indication that not like the rest of or 80% of other biotech companies are also working with. And we've done a study once on melanoma, which is one of the most popular indications to look at within cancer therapy. And if you would analyze the amount of patients that would need to be included in studies, all studies, and how many patients there would actually be, you'd see that like you're tenfold off, like there are not enough patients to include in all these trials. That's a major issue, obviously. Yes, and otherwise be aware of technological development. I think that's well, the picture say it pretty nicely. Like, I mean, you can replace a horse and a wagon with a much nicer version of horse and a wagon, or you could develop a Tesla, right? So always consider other technological developments as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. And then it's team, and that's my last slide as well. And I think team. I mean, that's important in every investment you're doing, if it's in healthcare or anywhere else. And then obviously it has to do with management, right? So different companies or different companies at different stages need different types of skills. For example, in the initial stages of a company, it's really nice to have the founding scientist in the company that could tweak and think new around the scientific concepts. While at a later stage, your most important person may be the one who is actually doing the marketing, right? So that also brings it back to pharma is not biotech, and vice versa. To have like without without really like saying anything. But I think having a really big pharma executive in a biotech company doesn't always work out, even though that person has a lot of experience. And then experience with startups, done it before, it's always an advantage. We've seen that in Norway as well, obviously, with the founders of Algeta. It's easy for them to raise money, right? Or at least comparably easy, because they've done it before. They know what they need to do. They know how it works. And they've shown to be successful once before. But then I think this is a point that's highly underestimated. That's the shareholders, and that's with a little bit of critique too, or not critique maybe, but just some considerations that companies really need to do, and that other shareholders also need to do. Choose your shareholders wisely. I think it's one of the things, one of the main lessons that I had in my first year of P53. But it's so important to have a good cohort of or consortium of shareholders. Then if you get your shareholders in, follow up, keep them updated, be honest, never lie. You will always be found out. Most shareholders or investors will get a lot of opportunities to invest in small companies. So follow them up. If you don't show your face, or you're not sending emails, you will probably not get an answer. Always prepare for your next round of funding. Think ahead, have a high level strategy. Are you gonna get your money from venture companies or from private family offices, for example? And then take the money, but if it's good, right? So if it's a bad deal, don't do it. But if you can get the money from good investors, just take them, because suddenly COVID-19 comes looking around the corner, right? Network is crucial. And then also when it comes to partnering, start early, it takes time. They want to see data, and they can definitely guide you in the right direction. So that was what I wanted to say for now. And I see Hanne-Mette is showing up again on video, so that probably means the end of my time.
Yeah, this is my a minute left sign this time.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, we will not be able to give you an applause after the talk, so this is a virtual one. Thank you very much, Susanne. And everybody feel free to reach out to Susanne both now and also afterwards if you have any questions.
Yes, please.
Thank you. And then we will move forward to the next speaker, which is Øyvind Enger from Sarsia Seed. He's a partner and investment advisor. And also today's fun fact about Øyvind is that he is a microbiologist of training, which is quite relevant at these times, I would guess. So please, Øyvind, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Hanne-Mette. Could we have the slides? Thank you. Thank you for letting me have this opportunity to talk about us in Sarsia. Or maybe first of all, welcome to Bergen. And we have nice weather today, as you can see, as always. I will say a few words about the Sarsia funds. I will say a few words about how we think, how we operate, what we're looking for. A lot of the things I will say when it comes to what we're looking for will be the same, more or less the same as Susanne just said, but in other words, I think. And then I will give a couple of examples on how we work and where we have succeeded, and I will give one example of where we have failed and why I think we failed, and what are the take-home lessons from that. Next slide, please. So we've been operative for 13 years, and so we started back in 2006 with our first fund. And we are now managing 2 funds with a total of 820 million Norwegian kroners. which and we have invested through this 13 years in 30 companies, of which 20 companies are still active in our portfolio. In total, we have invested 320 million Norwegian kroner, and we have so far realized in our first fund 435 million NOK. Our deal flow has been very, very good. These 13 years, we have evaluated a total of 800 companies and projects. And we also have a very good co-investor base. Together with us in this journey, we have co-investors that have co-invested 3 billion NOK in our portfolio. We are a team of 5 persons. The life science team is Farzad, which is the guy to the left, and myself. Erlend Skagseth, who is our managing partner, is the guy standing just to the right of Farzad. And we have 2 separate boards in the 2 funds, and the investment decisions will always be made by the board of the fund. Next slide, please. The investors in our funds, some of them are quite big, and we have a total of 21 investors in our funds, and you can see there are some quite well-known logos in this slide, and it's interesting that we have 6 of our investors. They are invested in both of our funds, and we think that means that they are happy with what we are doing and the way we are working. You can see there are both larger and smaller investors in both funds. Next slide, please. We think that Norway has a great opportunity as a home of good life science companies. We have a very strong and high quality research over a long time within life science in Norway. There are some very typical strongholds in the Norwegian life science where we are really world leading, and we've been looking to try to use those strongholds as a basis for our investment strategy. And as you will see later, we work with all the universities and also some of the main research institutes. In Norway these days, we have a few specialized institutional investors working in our field. And life science is a very complex area, and I think that it's difficult for non-experts to do meaningful investments in life science, at least in the early stage. We are very, very early stage in our approach. The only thing we need in order to invest, in fact, is a company. And in some instances, we have also been part of the establishment of companies. So we've been in from the start. And if we look at the table down to the left here, we can see that Norway is really we have no reason to feel that we are lagging behind the other countries when it comes to scientific production. We have almost the same amount of scientific papers per capita as our neighbors, the Nordic neighbors, and more than a lot of the big European countries. And that's where we like to start, and that's what we like to use as a kind of a basis for our for what we're doing. Next slide, please. This is an overview of a lot of Norwegian research institutions, and that's to the left, and to the right you will see the companies that we have invested in coming out of these research institutions. We work with almost all Norwegian larger research institutions and universities in Norway, and we have regular meetings with the TTOs in all the major universities. And as you can see, there are maybe 3 main places where we have found most of the companies. That's Oslo, Bergen, and Trondheim, and that's not surprisingly, I guess. So out of the 800 deals that we have been offered, you can see to the right that there are about 30 companies in the portfolio. And as you can see, also you might see that we are not only investing in life science, we're also investing in the energy field, and these days especially in renewable energy. But our main activity is within life science. And then when we say life science, we mean life science in the broad definition. We invest in everything from fish feed to cancer medicine. So we have a very broad approach. When I say fish feed, we're of course not investing in production of fish feed, we're investing in new fish feed technologies. Next slide, please. I said that we had been able to attract 3 billion NOK from co-investors in our portfolio. Here is an overview of our co-investors some of our co-investors to the right. In total, we have 300 smaller or larger co-investors. It's important to distinguish between co-investors in our portfolio companies and investors in our fund. So these 300 investors, they are invested directly in the portfolio companies. And you can see that in the middle there, that we have co-investors from industry, from the finance industry, from universities, venture capital, friends and family. We often say friends, fools and family, but today we say friends and family. And also we have some industrial professionals that are invested in our portfolio. So please, next slide. Could you click further on in this slide? Just fill it. And the last one, yeah. Thank you. We're looking for, I have to just organize my screen a bit. We're looking for more or less the same things as Susanne said, but we might put it in other words. We look for unique technology, of course, because it needs to be patentable. and uniqueness and patentability is closely linked. We look for robust technology and well-documented technology, which means that it, as Susanne put it, it should be published, and it should be published in highly ranked journals. And we are looking for technologies that are solving problems, truly solving problems. Hanne Mette, you're coming up. Okay. So it should be nice, need to have, not nice to have technologies. That's important to us. We look for teams that are competent, that have industrial experience, that are impatient and persistent, of course, and they should be team-oriented and coachable and flexible. Coachable means that they should be able to listen. They should have at least 2 ears. We look for projects and companies where it's possible to do early syndication. We think that it's in the early phase, it's risk enough for everyone. So we're happy to share risk. And we look for competent investors and also investors that, like us, are impatient but persistent. And when it comes to time, we look for good plans with strong milestones. And we are very, very aware of expectation management between us and the founders, that we have the same expectations when it comes to development and to exit opportunities. Next slide, please. I think I can skip this slide for the sake of time. When everything is like in the list I just presented, we can have examples like Vaccibody. Susanne mentioned Vaccibody, and we were actually the first investor in Vaccibody back in 2009. And what is important here in this slide is that the valuation of Vaccibody back in 2009 was 6 million NOK. Today, or yesterday, actually, the value of the company was 5.8 billion NOK. So this is about persistence, and especially in biotech and life science, things takes time, and so with early investment and a lot of good co-investors, we have been able to create a tremendous value of 6 billion NOK. The shares of Vaccibody are traded, so this is a real value. I think that we should go on to the next slide. This is another success story. Prophylix Pharma, a company that was sold last summer to an American biotech, where we have invested a total of 11 million NOK, and the deal value of the sale is approximately 3 billion NOK. It depends on some market milestones and so on. So we don't know, in fact, don't know the exact value yet, but the potential value is about 3 billion NOK. And then maybe the most interesting slide would be the next one, where we failed. This company had everything. It was a mask-free respiration measurement system in a segment where masks are not allowed. The system was CE marked. We had 6 scientific publications. We had a strong patent portfolio. We had a route to approval agreed by FDA. We had one of the best investment banker, and he worked for 3 years. We had a very good value proposition with a big market, as you can see. But in 2018, the company was terminated. Why? We think it was because it was nice to have, not need to have. There's been tremendous progress in this field when it comes to survival of preterm babies without this equipment. So the clinicians would always say, why do we need it? It would be nice, but we can't afford it. And so there are always ways of handling this. The medtech industry has changed to buying products, not projects. That's very important. This is my last slide. That's very important because buying products, they're buying products that are ready for the market or already in the market. They're not buying development projects. And we think that this case was too small to make the investment banker really hungry. And so although he worked for 3 years, he was not able to find an industrial partner. So, and we learn a lot from this. And as you can see, we invested as much money in this company that failed as we have invested in Vaccibody. That was a big success. So that's my last slide, and thank you for letting me talk.
Thanks a lot, Øyvind, for your valuable insight and also the experiences on both the good cases and the learnings from those cases that didn't succeed. I think both of them are equally important for both fellow investors and also for the companies listening to really try and figure out which elements will help them on their way to success. The next speaker on the list is Jørgen André Nielsen from Televenture. I actually had Aitana Peire on my list, but I think it's the presentation of Jørgen first. So if it's okay by you, Aitana, we will do Jørgen first. Thanks. So the next speaker is Jørgen André Nielsen he's a partner at Televenture. They have invested to start with in IT type of companies, but has also broadened to a lot of other areas. So Jørgen, the stage is yours. Just 1 second. Iselin, I think you need to promote him from attendee to panelist to get in. Okay, but well, yeah, now we are very close to. Jørgen, you are on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear.
So thank you for the introduction, and very happy to be here. And I want to use this opportunity to present us as a fund, and also to give you some of my kind of personal opinion on this situation and where I believe investment in healthcare going. So, well, you can switch over to the next slide, please. So a lot of you, I believe, don't really know our company and our investment firm. That's why we made this very crowded slide to try and explain as best as possible. The name Televenture is basically a name that's stuck with a management company since 1993. When Televenture was the venture arm of Telenor. It was actually during the time when Telenor was Televerket. It was an old 100% state-owned telco. And Rune Rinnan, the founder of Televenture, managed to convince the then CEO of Telenor that it would be useful to have a corporate venture arm. So Televenture functioned as the management company for the corporate venture arm of Telenor. And through basically the period 93 to up to 2008-9, they managed a number of funds that focused on investing in companies that spun out of the big Telenor R&D initiative. Companies such as Tandberg, Eltec, Opplysningen 1881. But as the telecoms progressed, and especially Telenor, it became evident that they were more focusing on business innovation, expanding their mobile empire to countries in Asia, and not so much focusing on R&D and tech R&D. So in 2008, when I joined, and also Dag Terje Rian, we had been working at Kjeller Innovation, trying to establish a small investment vehicle for early stage investments. But we understood quickly that we didn't have enough money, and we didn't have enough management resources to really do this well. So we joined forces with Televenture Management, and since then, October 2010, we have launched a series of investment funds, mostly early stage, that have been focusing on all the opportunities that have been produced in Norwegian, basically research and science, and those opportunities that have been more or less managed by the technology transfer offices. So, so the first 4 funds have been all very early stage. They have been focusing on companies that have had a very broad scope. We've been very industry agnostic. At one point, we said that we would invest in absolutely everything except biotech and health tech, because we really didn't feel that our management team had any background to evaluate those deals, and we thought also that this was a very complex space to invest in. But looking now back on what we actually have invested in, we have actually a set of companies that are in this space. And the reason why we have dared to be in that and invested as co-investors in those companies is that we have always needed a first what should I say, lead investor. Yeah. Lead investor, and sorry. Just have the homeschool kids interrupting as usual. And I just tell them that it's allowed to fight, but no punches at the head. So I was going to explain how we basically invest. We need a competent investor to lead the deals. We have been fortunate to work with Sarsia for a number of deals, BergenBio, and Apim Therapeutics. So when we see something that we think could be an interesting pharma biotech deal, we want to run this by companies and professionals that really knows the space. And if they think it's a good investment opportunity, we like to join. So in that sense, we're not maybe the first to contact when you have an early stage idea in this space, but we can be a good co-investor. We have, however, invested more or less using our own management and professional network to assess the deals in other companies, Genetic Analysis and fund number 1, Glucoset fund number 4, Holberg EG, and lately also Inhibio. So it's not absolutely necessary for us to have a lead investor. So I think this is basically as much as I want to say about basically our portfolio and our strategy. We, as you would probably guess, we have a lot of companies in a number of industries, and what really has been on our mind after the COVID has been the well-being and the future of all these companies. If we before basically worked as general practitioners or nutritional advisors helping and nurturing our startups, we're definitely now in the ICU, and we're working round the clock to triage and figure out which companies need a lot of attention and what will their future look like. A part of our portfolio is also in oil and gas. So in addition to the COVID, we also had the oil price challenges. We have companies that went from their best months ever in March in sales and revenues to absolutely zero projected revenues for the next 6 months. So there's obviously been a big job to assess the capital need, to find alternative sources, and also to see if there is any pivot we can do, if there is anything that this COVID crisis basically opens up for. And there are, absolutely. But it has also made us really learn the value of the team. And that is, of course, something that I think every venture capitalist will tell you, that the team matters. And it does matter. And it's really in a crisis like this that you will see what is a good team and what is a not so good team. And there have been a few surprises. We have seen companies and teams that have done really well when basically there has been a good inflow of investments and a good inflow of sales in their organization. But when crises have hit, they have basically not been able to manage. And we have seen managers that have been maybe a little more introvert and maybe not as aggressive, basically been able to turn things around and done a fantastic job in finding new opportunities for the company. So as much as we want to and try to evaluate the team and spend the resources getting to know a team, I mean, times like this is a real test of what a team can do when they basically get a message like COVID, that things basically change and they change fast. The other thing that basically we have learned as a management team, and I think is an important thing to that I think we will take forward after some of the worst effects of COVID basically are gone, is that there has been an instant change in productivity. I just realized now how much time I've spent traveling and not to mention scheduling, trying to make boards meet, trying to make managers meet, trying to get an introduction to a new company. It's been a lot of waste in scheduling and changing of schedules and traveling. When everybody is more or less in the same situation, they're tied to their screens. There is I think, extraordinary opportunity that companies should try and capitalize as much as possible on to reach out to people that are normally far away and are normally extremely busy. This is a time where you can actually reach an executive in Switzerland or in Asia that you normally would need maybe 2-3 months lead time to just get to be introduced to. So I think the companies that spend their times wisely now, that focus on what they can do in this situation that they normally would have to spend a lot of time and money on, they would get a good start when things starts to open up. The other observation I have, and that I think is very relevant, that this is a good time to do a little shakeout of what's nice to have and need to have, as also Øyvind pointed out. One of the mistakes that it's sometimes very hard to make is to really understand and really get a good grip of what's nice to have and what's need to have. Hopefully, I think we will see that a lot of health tech that we have been talking to as nice to have will now become need to have. You have, of course, the obvious example of Confrere, the video conferencing solution for general practitioners. Fantastic product and ready to go, but really no need from the users to start using it. And they basically went from a few percent market share to 90% in days. Not because the tool was not needed before, but because basically you had a situation where there was an incentive for not just 1 or 2 or 10, but everybody to start using it. And I think that that's the type of opportunities that it's important to look for now, and also if you are a health tech company that basically can try and really identify the need to have aspects of your product now. This is a good time. I think all kinds of technology for digital health, remote monitoring will have a really good moment ahead, and also, of course, for ICU technology. But there is, of course, also a downside to the COVID. I mean, we, or at least as a founder and an entrepreneur, you should stay positive. But there is, of course, some troubles ahead and some indirect negative impact. One is, of course, that for new investments, it might be a little harder to shake the investors down the tree. They have both more things that they need to worry about, like us having a big portfolio. We will obviously also kind of have the chance to look even further into the companies, and without really knowing what the future looks like, might be more on the cautious side. And of course, we really don't know what impact COVID will have on kind of processes that have been hard in the first place, like regulatory processes. Will basically the health bureaucracy be able to keep up, or will they now be swamped with all kinds of regulatory challenges with just solving the COVID crisis, the fact that they're working from home offices and so on? Will that basically mean that applications will take longer to process, or will it be quicker? We don't know yet. Obviously, clinical trials, it's challenging. Hospitals have to focus their resources on on the COVID, and of course, COVID presents a risk in any clinical trial, especially with cancer patients or others that are risk patients. So there will be some delays, and delays usually means also challenges to the cash flow. But I think in general, I think we all should use this crisis to just work harder, work smarter, and try and basically do all the stuff that we won't be able to do once we get back to more or less the normal state and get busy and traveling again. So with that, I think that was pretty much my introduction, and I'll be happy to network with you later.
Thanks a lot, Jørgen, and also warm applause to you from the audience. We have approximately 80 viewers constantly during the presentation, so we're super happy to have you all listening. Very interesting views, and also encouraging to see both the challenges and the opportunities that the COVID crisis also poses. The next speaker is Aitana Peire from Canica. She's investment manager. She came to Canica in 2019, and before that she was at Venture Valuation, a Swiss company. So she has been looking into company valuation, both from the small company or sell side, and also from the buyer side, from either investors or larger companies. So Aitana, we look forward to hearing your views. We can see you, but right now not hear you, Aitana. No, unfortunately not now either.
Now you can.
Yes, now we can.
I mean, there are some joys of new technologies. I don't have a presentation, so you are going to be seeing me for 15 minutes. Welcome to Zurich, which is where I am based. As many of you know, or a few of you will know, Canica is a Norwegian family office. We have offices in Oslo, but also in Pfäffikon near Zurich. And the origin of the family office, it's in retail. So the main focus of the Hagen family of Stein Erik, who is the founder, has been retail operational companies. But they have traditionally also have a strong interest in healthcare. This has been in the shape of philanthropy and also of direct investments in some life science companies. Recently, they decided to make it a more strategic position, healthcare, understanding the importance it has for the world, but also for Norway. And they brought me over to look after the future of health at Canica. So that's my specialty, as Henriette already mentioned. So it's let's say relatively new that we are looking at it from a strategic perspective. That also means that when we look at new investments in healthcare in this space, we are looking that they fit within the strategy that we are laying out for healthcare. Before it was perhaps a more opportunistic way of approaching it, companies that looked interesting. Now it has to be companies that look interesting, that fit with what we are looking for. This evolves, so it's difficult to tell what specifically we are looking for. We have longer investment horizons that some investors, perhaps shorter than others, and it's more diversified than in many cases when there is a more fixed life for the investment period. For sure, what we are doing is one thing that is clear to us is that healthcare, as has been mentioned, it's a global industry. So we are looking internationally for investments. We are looking everywhere for things that will bring solutions in the field of health, and that can be biotechnology. I mean, it can be therapeutics, it can be medical devices, it can be diagnostics, it can be CDMOs, anything. Now, I also wanted to discuss a little bit how we are seeing investing in these times, how the current situation has affected the way we approach investments or new investments. I mean, it was already mentioned. It's a special time, and all investors have to look at after their current portfolio, and that's important, and that's particularly important to us, not more than to others, but for sure for us it's particularly important because we want to be, or Canica wants to be, long-term investor, and that means that we want to be committed to the companies that we have in the portfolio. That's also going to mean that right now we want to make sure that we are there for them, that we can support them in as much as we can and as much as they need. And that also means that we need to be more conservative with the capital to make sure that there is capital available for the companies that we already are committed to and invested in. That means we have become more adverse to risk than usual, and that's natural. I mean, we want it to stay that way. We have come across many investments, like always. This has not stopped. The flow has not stopped. What we are seeing now also is more investments, more secondary investments. So investors that are looking to exit a specific investment because perhaps they don't have enough liquidity, they have suffered in other parts of the portfolio, and they need to exit a position. That's just an exchange between investors. The companies are not going to directly benefit from it, or at least it's not going to provide them with capital to grow, and that's something that we try to avoid. So that's a message that we want to bring to companies. We are not the only ones. We have heard it from many people, but perhaps it's a time to contact investors, to start discussing with investors, but to not expect that the investment time is going to be too short. That's also a message that might be useful to understand that the investment process is not a fast one in general for private investors, because, as I said, it's a long-term commitment. And yeah, Susanne also mentioned it before, we come across many investments. We need to make sure that we understand the investment we are entering, to make sure that it's a partnership that benefits as much as possible everybody involved. So perhaps I can also discuss a little bit now. I'm seeing that you are seeing that part of the room. I was not expecting it. This is not my bedroom. It's my office, but we have a guest bed there. Yeah, so I also wanted to maybe give you a few tips of what I think is useful when I interact with companies, what I find it to be useful approaches when they are introducing an investment topic to us. For sure, the introduction is very important. It cannot be stressed enough. Sometimes companies only have one project, only have one product, and they want to get directly into that product. That's great. It's for sure very interesting and very useful, but it's also useful to give a certain background of the company, introduce the general context, so that the topic can be a bit better understood. And what's the company history, what's the motivation of the management team. Those things are always interesting, because as also Susanne mentioned, and everybody has mentioned this morning actually, the team is going to be a very important factor when deciding on an investment, because it's basically you are selecting collaborators, you are selecting co-workers in a sense. So it's important to understand who is the people behind the project and why they are there and what has brought them there. I mean, it's good to understand the story. The context, however, has to be relevant, and that also goes to making sure that you understand. Susanne was mentioning whether a product is druggable. That's definitely something that is important for you to understand. You are not, and this applies much more to therapeutic companies than medtech companies that perhaps are building a prototype, but to understand that solving a scientific problem is the first step to making sure that you are then solving the problem within the broad society. And for that, it's useful to hear a description of what is the specific problem that you are trying to solve. So if I have companies coming to me and saying 1 of 3 people will die of cancer, that's, it's an interesting fact, but it perhaps does not apply to a company that is developing a diagnostic that will only be applicable to solid tumors or to liquid tumors, or a targeted therapy that will only be for a specific subtumor type. So trying to be more specific when you are presenting the project is definitely very useful. Also giving us an idea of the market, not assuming that we already know, because we might have seen 5 oncology companies plus 3 companies with a medical device to measure heart rate, plus, there are lots of different types of topics, and you are the experts. It really helps if you introduce the topic as if it was new, as if we had never heard of it. You don't need to go into a lot of detail, but just to give an overview of that as well, no? And then it helps if you also understand what you think the product is going to look like once it gets into the market. So what are the potential sales for that product, whether it's you bringing it to the market or not. But try to stay realistic. I mean, I've heard a few companies telling me they were developing the next Lipitor. Maybe they are, but probably at preclinical stage or phase 1 is a bit early to tell. And it's also important to stay realistic and to understand that there are many other companies doing great work, developing fantastic projects. So yeah, try to, when you are trying to give us an idea of what your product is going to be like, find comparables that you consider a bit conservative, but that can give an idea of the potential sales. Then you for sure need to present your technology or your science, explain why it is unique, what studies you have to prove that it has been unique, but maybe for a first interaction, 1 or 2 graphs are enough. I mean, I'm not going to be doing a scientific due diligence the first time I meet you. I just need to see that there are results that look convincing, that are easy and clear to understand. And I know that's very difficult because obviously you have been working on your projects for a long time and you really like everything that you have achieved. But if you can synthesize it without overwhelming me and other investors with information, that goes a long way. Also, going back to whether it can be druggable, it's useful to know whether you understand the steps that are necessary to bring a fantastic scientific discovery to a solution that can then be marketed. That includes the patent strategy. You cannot sell what you don't own. And that again is going to apply much more to therapeutics. Sometimes with medical devices there is a lot of know-how that is involved, but to know that you have a strategy to protect your invention, that's also very important. I mean, in general, what is very, very useful and what I really like to see is that you understand what is required to bring the project to fruition, and that you understand which pieces you still don't have, and that you have a plan to cover those pieces. It doesn't need to be a super detailed plan, and it's something that we can work on together. But that you are doing the thinking. that you have already been thinking about what is going to be required to make sure this project is successful. Then I think the management we have discussed enough or has been discussed enough. Then when you are looking for funds, perhaps this is also important to mention. In general, we like to know what you want those funds for. And this goes back to you knowing what the project requires, but also to make sure that you are asking for enough money to be able to fulfill your strategy up until the point where something will be created. It doesn't need to be the end point. It doesn't need to be the point when you sell your company or you go or you market your product or you have enough sales to be self-sufficient, but something that has helped create value. If you try to raise funds between two value points, it's going to be much more challenging because the previous investors will be losing part of their investment in order to allow for new money to come in. So try to make sure that you ask for enough money and that you have an idea, a strategy of what you want to do with those funds. And also try to have an idea of what the future might look like. I mean, once you have developed your project, once you have created a product, once you have started entering a new market, what comes next? And beware that your preferred option might not be available. So it's also useful to have plan B, plan C. I don't want to run out of time, but I have not been warned yet. So I think maybe I can discuss a little bit about the valuation, because as Hanne mentioned,
1 minute.
It was my previous experience. You have a lot of that information available. It doesn't need to be super accurate, but again, you are the experts in your field, so you can try to look for products that you feel are comparable. For that, you just go into the therapeutic area that you feel is the most relevant to you. You see which treatments are being used right now, and you try to understand what sales those treatments sell for. That's already very useful information. And then if you want to understand the value of your company, you can look for a future company, you can look for comparable IPOs or for comparable transactions, but make sure that you don't only choose the highest value one, because that's, again, not very realistic. You might always want to go for a range. So I think in a nutshell, what I wanted to mention today is that when we discuss with companies for the first time, what is useful is to try to understand the project. You have much more information, so please make it easy for us to understand. Even if we are very interested, we don't have as many details as you in our heads. So try to summarize the information and make it very informative in a compact manner. And then it's very important that you know what you have and that you also know what you don't have, and that you communicate that openly. You don't need to be particularly negative about yourself. There is absolutely no need for that. But maybe say, right now we don't have a chief medical officer, but once we enter the clinical trials, we understand we will need to hire one, for example, that sort of thing. So I think, yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say today. And I look forward to the paneling later.
Thank you so much, Aitana. This was very, very valuable. The next speaker on our list is Daniel Holt Larsen. He's a senior associate at Investinor and also Shelterwood, which is a new initiative that we look forward to learning more about, also for the wood industries. So Daniel, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anne-Mette, and thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to begin by saying I think it's fantastic and shows a tremendous effort from the people at the Life Science Cluster that we are able to follow through with the conference in this format in demanding times. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Daniel, and I'm a senior investment associate at Investinor. I'm here today to talk a little bit about what we at Investinor like to think about when we invest, a little bit about what I like to think about when investing, and to talk about the subsidiary fund to Investinor that I co-manage called Shelterwood, focusing on forestry related sectors. So next slide. Next slide. So I reckon that many of you know us from before and have had some experiences with us. So I won't go through this in the detail, but we're owned 100% by the Norwegian government. We always co-invest with others. We take up to 49% stakes in the companies that we invest in, and we participate with 49% of those financing rounds. So in our direct investment mandate, which I will talk about today, we have 4.2 billion NOK. We have accounted for roughly a third of all venture capital financing in Norway the last 10 years. We have the 65 portfolio companies divided by a team of 16 investment professionals. So if we go to the next slide. From all sorts of backgrounds, from being successful founders, coming from management positions at companies, investment bankers, venture capital and private equity, and other transactional advisors. So we use that knowledge and experience in everything that we do. So next slide. We have a very comprehensive approach for how we evaluate companies before we invest. This is typically in like the growth venture capital segment, not the seed segment. And it's mostly driven by our industry network, our market access, the experience of the team, and the experience from other transactions. So I don't have the time to go into this in detail, I think, but you get the point that we have advantages in our sourcing work, in the evaluation of the businesses, and in the transactions itself as well. So next slide. And that approach has led us to invest in some of the most exciting businesses in Norway and elsewhere, as you see some examples of here. And I reckon that some of you probably know most of these companies. Some of them are even present from what I understand, which is great. And in terms of mix of the portfolio, we have about roughly 70% of our capital in technology and healthcare companies, but with other mandates like forestry, which I will talk about later, and aquaculture as well. So next slide. On the left here, you see part of our like investment cycle and volume of what we have assessed below. While on the right-hand side, you see sort of the key elements we look for when we invest in companies. So this is like the usual suspects, if you may. So, but since this seminar is called In the Mind of an Investor and not in the mind of a large investment organization, I'm going to be focusing a bit about what I find personally to be key when investing and working with companies. So we can go to the next slide. On the right here, you see my baseball card at Investinor, and we use these cards to showcase our performances from the last year and what we're going to do for this year, our drive and motivation, and also out of office activities and fun facts to share with the team. And they're shown on monitors in our offices, and we print them out in like card formats as a fun gimmick to hand out in meetings. Now from my side, as you can see, I mean, what's most important is that what we learn from filling out this card is obviously that many of us consider different things to be like the most important when we invest. And for me, I think the validation of having a strong team, which several others have commented on today, in place is key. So if those people are strong, they are typically ambitious. And ambitious people target big markets, which is sort of my next point there. Now, some of my colleagues might believe that product is more key, or that the market opportunity is more key, and nothing is wrong about any of them. In fact, if you look at the history of venture capital, the founding fathers, if you may, of venture capital, Arthur Rock of Davis and Rock. He typically invested in teams. Tom Perkins of Kleiner Perkins invested in products, and Don Valentine of Sequoia Capital invested in market opportunities. And I mean, none of them were wrong, and every single one of them were incredibly successful investing on these different premises as theses. So I just happen to think that great teams will figure out products and market opportunities. So that being said, how do you really evaluate the team? So that they're smart and have drive is sort of given. They have already grown innovative companies with traction most of the time when they meet us. But there are other factors that are important that maybe haven't been touched upon today as well. And it might sound a bit simple and a bit soft, but the fact that they're nice and good individuals to the core are like really, really important. So if we're having lunch with the founder and she or he treats the restaurant staff in a really bad demeanor, for me that gives an indication that we could likely run into some issues with how they treat the people in their organization. And we know that we will sacrifice family time on Friday nights to be on calls with that person later on. So if that person is, by checking references and observing their behavior, a person that is not good or nice to other people around them, then it really doesn't matter how smart they are. So now great teams, which people have talked about, and I think Jørgen mentioned also earlier today, are teams that can adapt to challenging circumstances like the ones we are facing now, for instance, and lead others and own up to their own mistakes and their team members' mistakes, be stubborn when that's needed, and take advice when that is needed as well. So I worked with many of the types, and I can tell you from my experience that a great team with an okay idea is going to end up better than an okay team with a great idea. So yeah, next slide. So drilling a bit further down, there are certain things that we have to evaluate, not only when we make the investment, but quite constantly throughout our ownership of the company. So what value are we getting for the money we invest? Now, venture capital valuation, contrary to what many people believe, it's not as simple as evaluating, public companies or private equity targets. At least not in my mind. There are numerous other factors than the P&L and balance sheet that play a role. Like team, for instance. I mean, if a team has a track record of building leading companies, maybe they even sold one for a lot of money, then that's going to be a more pricey entry than if they didn't have a track record. Also, it could be higher if the product development has been superior, the market access ability is second to none, or it could be, worse based on some of those criteria if they're not good as well. So that makes the initial assessment almost always a case-by-case study. And when you have invested, you usually invest more. So constantly evaluating what you have been getting for the money you have invested and what you will get for the money you are now investing and how that impacts your returns is really crucial. And how aligned are our interests with other stakeholders? This was touched upon by Susanne earlier today as well. Obviously, when we invest, they are aligned. That's usually why we invest. We have a business plan. We have agreed that we are working towards an exit when we reach a certain level and so on. But later on, the company has other investors too. Maybe the CEO has changed, and then we have to realign those interests over again. So that's another thing we're sort of constantly focusing on. The credibility of predictions when we build financial forecasts in due diligence stages, we surely learn a lot about like what to expect from the business, the revenue streams, and how it operates. However, the only thing we know to be certain is that that forecast is incorrect. So they are not going to end up on the figure that we say they will do in 2025. It could be higher than that, and it could be lower than that, but it's almost certain that it's not going to be exactly that. So, a lot of companies made predictions about the market and their financials for this year, probably in January or December. That probably looks a bit different now. So what do you have to do? You have to reassess and repredict every time you get into new situations, and that's another thing we focus on. On the subject of risk mitigation, there's always risk with every business, whether that's internal or external risks are always present. identifying those risks and constantly making sure that you're implementing the right measures to control and minimize the risk should be part of like every value creation plan for a company. And then finally, the last point is how do we add value as investors, and what can the company do in general to add value, whether that's through organic growth, M&A opportunities, strategic partnerships, or joint ventures. Think of it as us, like we prefer to see a tree that can grow up like different branches over time after we invest, compared to just a pole that can't really grow any branches at all. So this is probably what we work on most before we invest in deals, and also what we work on the most with our portfolio is the actual new channels for growth. One thing I don't mention on this slide is obviously the potential for the business to access capital, which is something we have been struggling with in certain industries like forestry. So that leads me to the next slide. We received a mandate of 500 million dedicated to forestry related sectors in 2014. And we have identified many opportunities for us, but our access to co-investors have been significantly limited compared to other areas. So in a way, the entire ecosystem around the industry is subordinate to the development we have seen in Sweden and Finland the last decades, probably partially due to the fact that we have had other natural resources to focus on. So we came up with a solution to some of our challenges, which is Shelterwood, as presented on this slide. So you can go to the next. And Shelterwood is Investinor's first daughter fund, and represents the first time Investinor manages private capital. We started it with the most amazing investors we could get for this type of setup, with Norsk Skogkapital, which is the investment company of all the forest owner organizations in Norway, Skogbrand, which is an insurance company for forest owners, and Norske Skog and Borregaard, which I assume you all probably know. And we make investments in seed stage companies in the industry, and have over the course of now the first sort of operating year made 3 investments compared to the 2 we have made from Investinor. So it has added a lot of flexibility for us, and looked a great network of experts, and allowed us to invest in companies we usually wouldn't be able to invest in. So as you can see from my last bullet point on this slide, right now we're working on expanding this, and hopefully we will have a solution ready soon that will allow us to further develop companies operating in this industry, both within the actual wood building stages and also the bio stages, because there's a lot of unutilized potential there that we need to work on. So stay tuned for that. And then the next and final slide. Yeah, I think that was it from my side. I tried to cover everything I was asked to cover. I hope it made sense to all of you, and I would love to cover more on the forestry side, linked to sustainability and SDGs as well, but we will do that hopefully another time. So please feel free to get in touch with me, either if you're an investor or entrepreneur and want to discuss opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. This was super interesting, and we look forward also to support you in making more innovation in the forestry area. From the life science perspective, we see that there's a lot of common areas between both forestry, agriculture, and marine sector, particularly on the resource utilization. So thank you very much. So the last speaker today is Ingrid Kjulstad. She is Chief Operating Officer from Catapult Ocean, and we're super happy to have you here. Ingrid, you are the last speaker, and your talk was delayed exactly 15 minutes. So this was the fun fact about Ingrid I just got from her boss is that she actually has her birthday today. So Ingrid, happy birthday, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. No better way to spend the birthday than to talk about things that really interests you. So I work in Catapult Ocean. We are a seed fund in Oslo, Norway, that invests globally. See if I can have the slides up. That would be great. We were established 2 years ago, and since then we have deployed capital from our first fund into 22 different startups from all over the world that meets our vision, which is on the next slide. A world where a thriving ocean is in harmony with economic development. I think this slide and this vision gives away an important fact about Catapult Ocean. We are an impact investor who are looking for investment opportunities that really meet the sustainable development goals and help us move the state of the ocean in a better direction, and also help the ocean industries transform as part of the green shift and adopt new technologies that improves their sustainability and efficiency and profitability. If we look at the next slide, we have a broad focus as long as it touches the ocean and improves sustainability. We are interested. That means that if you are developing interesting technology for example, offshore wind deployment, we are keen. We are extremely interested if you have innovative ways of reducing CO2 emission from maritime transport. In the bucket harvesting, we are looking for opportunities, be that in seaweed, improvement of fish welfare, vaccines, or better operations in aquaculture. Ocean health is another big topic that interests us and many of our investors in the fund. We are looking for commercial solutions to for example, the ocean plastic problem, which turns out to be quite difficult, and in our experience will require mainly land-based investments in waste management. And then there is the bucket New Frontiers, in which we put technologies that are so-called enabling, that will indirectly improve the situation in the other areas here, or help the ocean industries take steps in a greener direction. I think an important note at the beginning here for all startups in the room who are looking to pitch to investors is to understand what drives the investor and to try to speak to their motivation and their vision as a fund. And we do see that those who are able to really connect with what we are eager to invest in, they have an advantage. So do some research on the investors that you are approaching, so that you understand what drives them, what motivates them, and what is the promise they have made for the fund they are managing. And I think doing some DD on the investors you are trying to get into your company is always going to be time well spent. Next slide. This is just an overview of the sectors, how we have allocated our investments between the various sectors that we are interested in. But if you look at the next slide, what unites all of them, as I said initially, is that we believe that all future-proof investments have to have sustainability at their core. It doesn't only relate to marine investments or other ocean-related investments, but we really think that the future of business is sustainability. And when you speak to us as an investor, it's incredibly important that you're able to position your company within that framework. Otherwise, we will not find it very interesting. And I think a lot of startups have a lot to gain from really understanding that. If we look at the opportunities that exist in the aquaculture space, if you go to the next slide, these are some of the investment thesis that we are looking to find when we are scouting for startups. Data-driven decision support technology for aquaculture, for fisheries, but also improvement of animal welfare, supply chain transparency, and then of course circular economy applications that can move all types of ocean industries towards zero waste is incredibly interesting. like some of the other investors here as well, when we think about sustainable feed, it's not necessarily the production that we are interested in, but more the technologies that go into it. Another interesting thing we're looking at is lab-grown seafood. And I think what's extremely exciting to be in the venture space is that you get to see some trends very early on, and lab-grown seafood is definitely one of them. That has happened in the meat industry, and we now see it happening in the seafood industry. And if you look at the valuations in the meat industry, I think it's just a matter of 3-4 years before we will start to see some really cool things coming out of the lab-grown seafood space as well. And then, of course, new use cases for algae and seaweed is definitely part of the marine future. We see that a lot of international companies and startups are looking to Norway as an interesting place from which to grow their business in this space. And we see that as part of our mission to also attract that type of international talent to come to Norway and also help us develop the industry here. So this is just to give you an example of some of the type of technologies and solutions that we'll be looking at when we are looking to invest. And you know, we have published this on our website, and I think to always go to the investors' website and see if they are being open about their investment thesis and see how your solution fits into their ideas. Again, I can't stress that enough. If you go to the next slide, I can speak a little bit more to some benchmarks that we're looking for when we are looking at investment opportunities. And this is not very different from what has been mentioned by most of the other speakers here today. Ideally, we would like to see a live product in the market or a functional demo. And we are quite, you know, can be a little bit flexible on that point, but there has to be, if there's not a live product in the market, there has to be a clear roadmap with milestones and concrete plans for how to reach those milestones. If the company has previously raised capital, that is a huge asset. That can also include soft capital, public funding, and angels, of course, but just to show that you have been able to sell the idea to others is incredibly important. A strong and complete founding team. Team has been stressed many times by all the speakers here today. And when we say strong and complete founding team, it also means a team that is able to reflect upon what they don't have in terms of skills and competences. At the stage we invest, which is very early, typically the team is 3, 4, sometimes 5 people. Of course, you're not a complete team. We know it, and we need to know that you know it, and we need to know how you think you can mitigate the deficiencies you potentially have by not having all the people on board that you would ideally have. If that includes consulting, working innovatively with PhD students or others, we'd love to hear about it. But reflections on how you as a team can work in a lean way and smart way, despite lacking resources, is always incredibly important. Revenue traction is, of course, always really interesting, but we see that when you invest in deep tech, in B2B, hardware companies, that can be a long way away. And what we then look for is your ability to form partnerships with industry players that allow you to test your applications, your tech, good pilot customers that come in early and give you good feedback. If you're able to demonstrate that as an alternative to revenue traction, that says something about the potential for your solution in the relevant industry, and can be just as relevant as revenue. Strong and relevant business model. And then, of course, we understand that the business model might change, but it's really important that we know you have thought through ways to bring your product into profitability. If you as a founder has previous exits, that's really interesting, but it's not necessary. But what is necessary is that you as a founder have given it some thought. What could be a great exit opportunity for you? Again, you don't have to have the solution. You might be many years away from an exit as well, but we want to know what you're working towards. And we want to know, how you believe you can bring valuation for your shareholders. If you haven't thought about that before you start raising money from serious investors, then you have to go back to your office and give it a hard thought, because this is a question that you typically will be asked. I mean, that the company has received press, it might be an interesting criteria for some of you, but it doesn't have to be in Dagens Næringsliv or in one of the main newspapers, but that we see the evidence of you being able to network and get your message across in the relevant industry for us is always really important. We have a rather, well, I would say rather lean screening and investment process, but I think it's something about when you're looking for investments, you typically always have way less time than what the investor has. So to align that, it's to align expectations on timeline. I think it's incredibly important. You should always be fundraising. If you only fundraise when you are running out of funds, it puts you in a bad negotiation position, and investors will pick that up. You want to fundraise when you have reached great milestones, when you have added value from your last funding round, and you want to come into the process with the time to also evaluate the investor, because you want to find the right match for you. So this is just the table here just gives an overview, high-level overview of how we are screening. We are typically making around 12 investments simultaneously. And when you work with, since we're managing an accelerator fund, that can be a slightly different process than when you're working with an investor who's assessing fewer deals at once. So just to understand that there might be some, depending on the type of investor, there might be some streamlining involved. That's important. If you go to the next. We are also quite diligent impact side of your business. Again, understand the investor that you're speaking to and what's important to them. If you speak to an impact investor, you have to be prepared to reflect around how you are creating a positive impact with the solution you are bringing to market. Next slide. I can give you the high level of what we and certainly many of the other investors here today are actually looking for. Fundamentally, you have to be able to tell us who owns the problem you're solving. If you just have great tech, it might not be a market for it. It might be a nice to have, but not a need to have. And you have to have a clear understanding of who is willing to buy. You have to tell us that. And if you can't tell us that, go back and think hard about whether you're doing the right thing. Again, is the team capable and committed? That can be measured in many ways. It's always encouraging to see that the first members of the team have ownership in the company. It says something about how founders are willing to make the team part of the journey. And last but not least, we have to think, can we contribute? Because we want to be a valuable asset to the company we are investing in as well. But if these three questions can be answered positively, we are on a good way. In the next slide, I just want to share some reflections on the COVID-19 situation. I think it's a very challenging time. It's unprecedented, and nobody really knows how it's going to spin out. I think we are currently looking for startups for our next investment round this autumn. And from an investor perspective, what I will say is that we see a lot more opportunities, and we get more opportunities as well. The number of companies that are approaching us looking for funding is much higher than what it used to be. And we're also, this is also from an international setting. So the competition is high. I think what's really important when you approach investors and enter into dialogue at times like this in crisis, you have to be really upfront about what is the impact on your business, be it positive or negative. And perhaps more importantly than ever, you have to really work on your financials. You have to be able to demonstrate your runway, what your contingency plans are if the situation in your markets continue for a longer time. And again, nobody knows how this will unfold, but you have to demonstrate that you're doing everything possible to survive for as long as possible. And having maybe a couple of scenarios that you can talk to the investors about is going to bring some comfort to us that you are someone who is not only like saying that you're good at adapting, but also doing the hard work of finding ways to survive such a difficult time period. And then again, not all markets are alike. We also see that in some sectors, the companies are thriving. So be really specific about how the market you are targeting is impacted. I think, again, this is the time for details and numbers and scenario planning, not for visions and grand ideas. But if you can give investors comfort that you're able to see how your company can survive for a longer period of time now, I think that is going to help quite a lot. I think I'll end it there because a lot of other points have been raised by previous speakers. Just some promotion for our Reportably Aware perspective, which outlines the different investment theses we have for the various ocean sectors that we are interested in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Thank you everyone for listening. We have had about 80 listeners to the presentations, which we are very, very happy about. Please go into your meeting rooms. I'm sure that some of you have already done so for the 11 o'clock meetings. Those of you that had meetings, there are approximately 45 meetings one-on-one agreed now. Chrome is recommended as the browser. It's important to know. One user experienced a problem in one of the other browsers, so Chrome is recommended. And following up to this seminar, we're also planning to make this a regular life science investor forum. So Øyvind Enger will probably also follow up with you afterwards to look at the different topics that we can cover in similar meetings going forward. So with those words, I would like to say thank you for listening to the presentations. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all the participants, and good luck with all your meetings the rest of the day. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you experience any problems or anything. So good luck. Have a very, very, very nice partnering day. Thank you.